So again, Jesus is in the garden. A lot has happened. He's experiencing a lot of different conversations. He's had his disciples, and he's praying for them. He's trying to help them understand what's happening. And so the garden comes to an end, and we'll find ourselves in Luke. I jump around a little bit today, but find ourselves in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 47. It says, so Jesus is done praying. He's out of the garden. He's talking to his disciples, and said while he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. So Judas had already done what he had set out to do. He approached Jesus and he kissed him. And Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. And history tells us that that's Peter. Peter's a little overzealous. But Jesus answered, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and he healed him. And then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come to him, am I leading a rebellion? You had come for him. I've come with swords and clubs. Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me, but this is your hour when darkness reigns. And seizing him, they led him away, and they took him into the house of the high priest, and Peter followed at a distance. And some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together. Peter sat down with them, and a servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, this man was with him, but he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, you are also one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. About an hour later, Peter asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean. And Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the words the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. He went outside and he wept bitterly. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking him and beating him, and they blindfolded him and they demanded, prophesy, who hit you? And they said many other insulting things to him. So Jesus has been arrested. Everything that he knew was coming came to pass. He told him, he said, listen, my hour had come. Go back to we're going to jump around a little bit, but if you go back to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 27, you realize that Judas takes his own life. He has this realization of what he has done. So Jesus has been arrested. Peter has denied him. Judas has killed himself. And so we find him standing in front of the Sanhedrin. Matthew 26, verse 57 says, those who had arrested him took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance. Right up to the courtyard of the high priest, he entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. This is the part that Luke includes is Peter's interaction. But Matthew says Peter was there. He was watching as these things unfolded. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. They were willing to lie just to find a reason to kill this man. He hadn't done anything wrong. Jesus even said it, that, "What have I done wrong? I've been with you this whole time, and yet you've never found reason to arrest me until the dark of night." Matthew tells us they were trying to find evidence, but they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting in the right hand of the Mighty One, and coming in the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes, and he said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face, and they struck him with their fist. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you?" Luke and Matthew capture the same details. He's being imprisoned and he's being spit on. He's being mocked. They found a reason to crucify him. But the Jewish leaders couldn't crucify him on their own. It wasn't their right. The Romans were the ones who had to put him to death. They were still under their authority, still under their power. Peter denies him. Judas hangs himself. Matthew chapter 27, verse 11, it says, "Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor." He's talking about Pilate. It said, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he responded, "You have said so." Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now, it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd, and at that time they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Barabbas. Barabbas was a known insurrectionist. He had killed people. He was trying to overthrow the government. Barabbas was a bad man. So when the crowd had gathered and Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you?" Pilate's trying to find a way to rid himself of this situation. He says, "Who do you want me to release to you? Jesus, Barabbas, or Jesus, who's called the Messiah?" For he knew that it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. This ungodly man, worldly man, knew that the Pharisees were just using this because they were selfish. There was no justification for this. So surely they would not release Barabbas. Why would they do that? While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message. It's always good to listen to your wife. So don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. They all replied, "Barabbas." "What shall I do then with Jesus, who's called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. And I'm not going to shout. The crowd shouted, "Crucify him." Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting. He took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood and on us and on all of our children." What a weird statement. They didn't understand how true this statement was. Not even Pilate understood that his blood was also. Jesus was going to die for him too. He didn't quite grasp this yet. So Pilate releases Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Pilate didn't want to deal with the crowd. He didn't want an uproar to start. He just wanted this to quietly go away. So he gave them what they wanted. When the governor's soldiers took Jesus to the Praetorium, they gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns, and they set it on his head, and they put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him, and they took the staff, and they struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off his robe, and they put on his clothes on him, and they led him away to crucify him. These men were spitting on him and mocking him. They were making fun of him and bowing down to him, and they were calling him names. Why would they do such a thing? What had Jesus done that deserved any of this? Even Pilate knew that he was innocent. Pilate understood. And yet, Jesus, this entire time, all he did was stay calm. Look at all the different Gospels. We start to piece together this understanding that the crowds were just angry. You know, the idea of a mob mentality is a real thing. It's a psychological thing. I've done a ton of research that shows that if you can convince people, and if you can remove people of responsibility, it's easy for them to just go along with things. So the crowds are calling out for the crucifixion of Jesus. Pilate's trying to save him, but it's not going to work. So they beat him, they torture him, they spit on him, they mock him. And then they take him out to be crucified. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon. And they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And there they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed a written charge against him. "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified, and one on his right and one on his left, 2 men who deserved to die for their crimes. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come now, down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. In the same way the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. So not only is his body broken, he's feeling the weight of the nails, the thorns, the flogging. But everyone is mocking him, spitting on him, making fun of him. I can't even imagine the weight of that moment. This is what he was praying for in the garden. This is the moment that he said, my hour has come. He knew the cross was the only way. He knew that he would be tortured. He knew that he would be beaten. He understood that this had to happen. So when you go back to the garden and you see how intense his prayer is, it puts it into perspective. God, if you can take this cup from me, but not my will, but yours be done. And then we come on the cross, and he's about to give up his life, and Jesus does a couple things in this moment. He gives his mother to his brother and says, take care of her. He says, God, why, at some point he cries out, God, why have you forsaken me? I can't even imagine the weight of that. I mean, imagine having perfect unity with God for your entire life, and in this moment there's a separation from that. And then all of this is happening. He cries out to God that God would forgive these people because they don't understand what they're doing. What a weird prayer. What a weird thought. To the crowd that has beaten you, spit on you, and mocked you, and cursed you. As you're hanging on the cross, you ask for my forgiveness. You ask God to forgive me. I remember when I was 15 years old, that's when I started going to church. And I remember I was sitting in an Easter service one time, and I had done Easter services before. We didn't really go to church when I was younger, but we definitely we were like Easter people sometimes, or like we would go on Christmas occasionally. You know, people do that, right? Like you go to church twice a year, you're good. You don't have to worry about it. God has a little punch card and yeah, good for you, right? Listen, I'm not trying to mock you or mock people who do that, but I'm telling you, if that's all you do, you're missing it. You are missing so much of what it means to be part of a church and a community, right? But I remember when I was 15 years old and I was sitting through an Easter message, and this is pretty close to before I gave my life to Christ. And I was hanging out at this church, and I told you guys about this. My friend Ryan, his dad, was preaching, and he was talking about Easter, and they were talking about the crucifixion of Jesus. And there was something in my mind at 15 years old that it just kind of stuck with me. And I remember when we were talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, and listen, I'm trying to pay attention as much as I can for being a 15-year-old. Like my brain wasn't all like developed, but I'm not trying to pay attention, so I'm kind of listening. And he's telling this story of Jesus at the cross, and he's talking about Barabbas, and he's talking about the criminals on the side of him. And he gets to this moment, and it was the craziest thing, because I feel like Ryan's dad's name was Russ. I called him Pastor Russ. I feel like he looked at me. Now, mind you, there's like 400 people in this church, so statistically, the chances that he looked at me is probably not going to happen, right? There's a better chance that I'm going to look at you, right, Dottie? Like, you can see my eye line right here. Like, I could just stare at Dottie all day long if I wanted to. But I'm sitting in this church, and I swear to you, this man looked at me. He said, as Jesus hung on the cross, he asked God to forgive the crowd for what they were doing. Because in that moment, he knew the only way you could be forgiven was if he died the way that he did. And I remember that because when I'm telling you, he looked at me, he said, the only way you could be forgiven. And I was like, me? And then I processed it, right? I sat there. I don't remember much of that message, the rest of it. But I remember he said the only way that you could be forgiven was if Jesus died on this cross. He prayed for the forgiveness of the crowd because they didn't know what they were doing. God, forgive them. They haven't quite figured it out. But they'll understand eventually. They don't understand that I had to die. God, forgive them. God, why have you forsaken me? Matthew 27 says, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those standing there heard this. They said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge, and he filled it with wine vinegar, and he put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. And the rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtains of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him regarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. I guarantee that in all of their crucifixions, never once did they see those events happen. The veil torn, the ground shook, the dead rose. They had this realization that what did we just do? This clearly wasn't just another man. Father, forgive them. They do not understand. You know, so much of following Jesus is a sacrifice. I was at camp yesterday with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and we were talking about this idea of being bold. And we talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you're familiar with Nathan and David, Nathan's an Old Testament prophet and had to go and tell King David that he had screwed up. And so we're talking to these kids about what it means to be bold. And all I could think about, especially as we get closer to Easter, is boldness often requires sacrifice. Jesus had to make a decision. He had to do something. He had to fix what was broken. So he did. This innocent man who had done nothing wrong took the beatings, took the spitting, took the mocking, took the being stabbed in the side. He took all of it. And at the end, he had this moment where he was separated from God, which he had never experienced before. He sacrificed everything. They set Barabbas free. This criminal. He watched as Peter denied him. He was there when Judas kissed him. And that sacrifice was everything. Because without Jesus dying, there's no resurrection. There's no empty tomb. Listen, I understand Palm Sunday is important. But without the cross, there's no hope. Palm Sunday was the day that Jesus turned toward Jerusalem and he came into the city. And he spent the week teaching, eating, getting ready for the hour to come. And then he was arrested, beaten, spit on, mocked, crucified. How do you get people to understand how important that is? How do you tell the world that this perfect, innocent man died for them? How do you look at people in the eye and say, Jesus did this for you? I'm 15 years old. And when I realized how much Jesus had done for me, like really done for me, not just reading it, but like it hit me harder than it ever had. When I realized how much he had sacrificed for me. This 15-year-old punk of a kid. The only proper response was for me to give my life to him. That's it. And I have spent every day since praying and seeking opportunities just to sit down with someone and let them know that Jesus died for you. Jesus sacrificed his life for you. Jesus gave everything for you. And as he's dying, he asks God to forgive us. There's no greater love than this. There's no greater hope than the cross. Everything else in this world that I could ever gain, every amount of money, the biggest house, nicest cars, I could be super popular. I could be known all over the world. And none of that will ever even come close to the fact that I'm known and loved by a man who was willing to die for me. Easter's coming. The tomb's going to be empty. We know that. But today, let's sit with the sacrifice. The sacrifice that God made. Jesus was willing to die for me. The only proper response is that I live for him.